The Thriller Zone with Dave Temple is sponsored by Gary Quessenberry and his new Case Younger thriller, Homecoming. Learn more at GaryQuessenberry.com. Hello and welcome to The Thriller Zone. I'm your host, Dave Temple, and I'm glad you're here because today is a very special day. Every once in a while, you set a goal for yourself of someone you really want on the show. And I set my intention for this particular guest a long time ago, probably about a year ago. And I kept thinking, well, all they can do is say no. And guess what? They said yes. So today, David Baldacci, #1 New York Times bestseller of 150 plus million books, is on the show. This book, Strangers in Time, is something you will want to cozy up with a cup of tea and silence around you and just chill out and enjoy. It's a departure from his standard legal stuff, but I'm telling you something, it shows what an incredible historical fiction writer he can be. Anyway, enough of me babbling. How about you and I get into the Thriller Zone with David Baldacci? Very few people do I want to. I don't know why this is. There's two people that have been on the show that I wanted to start with the title of Mr. Baldacci and Mr. Patterson. I don't know why.
Please, no.
Yeah, and I'm older than you, so, you know.
David is fine, David.
Yeah. It's the dueling Davids on the Thriller Zone.
Right.
Well, we're going to be talking about Strangers in Time, which was, as I put in, I was doing some social media on you yesterday, David, talking about what I thought about this book, just to give a little tease of the show that's to come. And I was talking about this departure because I'm flashing back. And I was doing this morning when I was on the treadmill. I'm like, oh, God, when did I first discover David's work? And I'm going back and I'm like, it's got to be mid-90s. So I'm like, okay, that's about right. 96, I think, was Absolute Power, right?
That's right. Yes.
And I thought at that time, I remember going, who is this cat? Now, this guy, this is a guy who really knows his stuff. And you were just a skosh after, I want to say, John Grisham. And I'm thinking about, this is when I really got absorbed by reading. And it's you and Absolute Power. It's John Grisham. It's James Patterson. It's Patricia Cornwell, Michael Crichton. And you were right there, in my opinion, at that perfect time for a stratospheric launch of your career.
Yeah, I was. I was very, very lucky. You know, the moons are not in alignment all that often.
And you were you were practicing law right up to that time. Were you writing at the same time?
Yeah, I was. I had to keep my day job. I was married. I had one child at that point. So, we needed to have income coming in. And I kept on practicing for about a year after the book was sold. And I was working on my second novel. And then I went in to tell my partner, I said, I don't think I can be a good lawyer and a good writer trying to juggle both of these careers at the same time. So I think I'm going to have to leave. And he said, look, if it had been me, I would have faxed in my resignation on day one. So thanks for hanging out for a year.
Wow. Now, but it takes a long time to become the kind of established attorney that you were. So,
yeah.
Which came first? Were you always like a closet writer, and you're like, this is really what I do, but I've got to, bring home the bacon?
Yeah, I was the former. I've been writing since I was a kid. When I was in law school, my classmates at UVA were trying out for law review and moot court, and I was trying to sell short stories to Playboy magazine. So that's what I wanted to do with my life. Although, quite frankly, as a lawyer, the only arrows I had in my quiver were words. And I have to say that some of the best fiction I ever wrote was when I was a lawyer. I just had to tell the best story based on the facts that I had. And so the transition from writing, being a lawyer full-time to writing full-time was pretty easy because it was just, again, an existence filled with words.
Well, for those folks who may not know David Baldacci, and I can't imagine that being the case, I'm going to give you a little inside scoop. Now, I'm going back and I'm looking at your list of books because I did some homework. 52 novels, 4 shorts, 7 children's books. But here, that's a lot of writing. That's a lot of words, David. But what caught my attention was the fact, and you started off kind of what always has felt like the pattern. I'm going to write 1 book a year. Here we go. It's going to take me a year. And that was the thing in the late 80s, all the way through the 90s. But then I started, because I'm a pattern watcher, I started noticing, I'm like, this cat's writing at around 2007. You start writing 2 a year and you're clicking out 2, and these are 2 hits. And then a couple of times, I won't bury you with details, then you went to 3 books a year.
Right.
My question is, how?
So, around that time, 2007, I've been writing scripts as well, spending time writing scripts and writing novels. And I just decided I'm not out in that world. You have to live out there and go to meetings and network and all. And I'm never going to do that. So I had finished a book early and I had an idea for another book. And then I wrote it fairly quickly. And I thought, this is a pace, because I'm the sort of guy, when I finish a novel, it's not like I could take 6 months off. I'm like, what's next?
Right.
And I'm always at my worst when I'm in between stories. So that's just what drives me. My motor on storytelling doesn't stop. It's not a job or a passion or even a hobby. It's what I identify as. So a 2-book-a-year deal worked really well for me. That was sort of my pattern. That was my schedule. That's the pace I wanted to work at. And then sometimes a 3 books a year is just I had surprise books, not even my publisher knew I was writing. I just had an idea for a book and I wrote it and I sent it up and they were like, Jesus, where the hell did this come from? Well, we'll slot it in somewhere. And I said, fine, I'm off writing the next one. See ya. So,
Well, see, this to me is the personification of a genuine writer. I hear people go, oh God, I've got to write a book a year and I've got to slog through this. And I'm like, you make it sound like it's not that enjoyable. The writers that I've run across, and I'm approaching 4 years with this podcast and almost 300 episodes, I find that the people just like yourself, you just nailed it right there. No. I've always been writing. This is who I am. So I often wonder to people who are, I'm spending, and then you find this, I'm spending 4 years of this novel. I'm going to rewrite it. And I'm like, David's already had 6 ideas since you've started your conversation with me.
it is really, it's just how my mind works. And, people say, where do you get all your ideas from? I said, it's pretty simple. I wake up every day and I walk out the door. And
Yeah.
I don't have my face stuck to this thing. I'm actually curious about life. I travel. I read a lot. I talk to people. I'm endlessly curious about how the world works and how people fit into that equation. And when you do that and you fill up all your little knowledge pots across the spectrum, it's kind of easy to come up with original ideas because no one else has the same knowledge pots you do, and they don't make the same selections you do. And sometimes I write a book just to answer a question I don't think life has answered. I did that with the 620 Man. So it's lots of reasons what drives me, to write. It is that insatiable motor that I have, but also the world is out there and you just have to be ready to receive the opportunity of living. And I've come up with ideas, just some people I'd seen walking down the street or getting on a bus and going into a building. And you just have to have your imagination ready to laser sharp focus on an opportunity and then bang, off you go. And so that's really how I'm wired.
It always cracks me up when I listen to other podcasts and they go, where do your ideas come from? And I'm like, if you wake up and put your feet on the floor and move through the day,
Yeah.
you're going to have about a dozen of them hit you. It just depends on which one feels like the right thing the rabbit hole to go down.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. It's it's a cornucopia, but most people, they don't focus on that. They're looking inward and not outward. When I just finished book tour and I go and I give funny talks to big crowds of people, and I think to myself, I'd much rather be out in the crowd watching everybody else. It's that yin and yang of writers spend most of their time in isolation. But there's a little bit of, you get a little bit of the ham sensation when you get up in front of people. And I like that too. As a trial lawyer, we're all hams.
Yeah.
I would prefer to be in the back of the crowd watching everybody and seeing, how they talk to each other, what things happen, how human beings interact really is what drives me, my focus, my concentration.
You brought up a really good point when you brought up the phone. And man, I think about this constantly. My wife and I just flew back from Northern California this weekend, and we went through the airport and I said, honey, look around. I'm like, see if you notice what I see. I promise you, David, and I know you know this as much as you travel, I'm going to be conservative and say 80% of the people I'm looking at are doing this. And I'm like, do you remember the days, David, when we were actually viewing and experiencing and relishing life without the digital babysitter?
I do. I fly a lot too. And part of me is always thinking, the pilots are up there on their phones,
Yeah.
while they're on autopilot. I send this little video around to people, that I found on YouTube that addresses your point, and I send it to them, and I said, and I asked them, "What is missing from this?" And I don't tell them where the video is from. It's actually from, like, 1994, and it's a street in New York City, and you have buses and cars and people and all that, and what's missing? And half the time, people figure out what's missing, half the time they don't, and when they don't figure it out, I said, "There are no phones. You see no phones out. Nobody's doing this." In 1994, people are walking and driving and on buses and talking to each other, interacting. Nobody has a phone out, It's, and I wish it were like that again, quite frankly.
Yeah. I hate to say it because I'm going to be talking out of both sides of my mouth because one side I want to say, people get off the damn toy. And the other side of me goes, we're filling all these tiny little moments with, well, I'm bored. I'm standing in line. I've got to do something. How about saying hi to your neighbor? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's like burning out our, long ability to read long form fiction too. Now people in college are not actually being assigned to read books or being assigned to read summaries of books because their brains can't focus for 400 pages, which scares the living hell out of me.
You're jumping ahead to a question I was going to have, and that is, do you find, and I brought up a point specifically, when you launched in 96, this was pre a whole lot of the electronics. So I remember the day when you would relish, oh, is it 400 or 500 pages? Oh, it's 600. Holy crap, let's go. Now it's like, I'm guilty of this probably because I'm reading 3 books a week probably for the show. And I'm like, 433, Dave, you're really pushing my patience. Could you not tell the story about 299? But my question is, do you feel that is almost single-handedly between the electronics phone and the way that video is being crunched at such a compression and fed at us so quickly that it is literally rewiring our brain?
It is. I mean, if you go to watch a video on YouTube or you even go to a movie theater, you get 2 hours of what a director wants you to know about. A book is the only venue that I know that you can sit down, and the book is not finished until the last reader reads it, because every reader is going to come over with their own conclusions, because it allows the reader's imagination to fill in a lot of gaps that the writer just can't fill in until the reader finishes it. Movies don't allow you to do that. Nothing else allows you to do that other than books. That's why when we were still in the dark ages until Gutenberg invented the printing press, and when books became widely available, that's when all of a sudden we came into the Enlightenment. And it's because books allow us to exercise our brain to the maximum in all good ways. We're not just a pliant, sitting back spectator receiving information and not having to think about any of it. Books you have to participate in, and it builds your brain to astonishing levels. And also not only builds your brains to where you can think better, it also, as I've said many times, and I did on the tour, books instill in you the greatest human attribute of all, and that's empathy. Because you will meet far more people in the pages than you ever will in real life. You'll travel to books in places you won't in real life. We've traveled in books to places you can't go in real life, like the past and the future. And it builds empathy and understanding and consciousness and all good things. And if you don't read books and you don't have empathy, it leads to all the worst in all of us. So that's why I preach to people, just because you pick up books, not reading, Baldacci on the beach for fun, it's actually building the depth of your humanity. It is.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. And so reflective of this particular book, Strangers in Time, two things that popped into my head. You always hear people say, oh, which do you like better, the book or the movie? Well, I like the movie. I'm like, I like the book. And I'm like, why would you not like the book when you are the director interpreting the entire story and able to build the entire universe in which you're enveloped?
Yeah, it is. I know. I get that too. And again, they're apples and oranges. Nothing, having your work adapted to the screen is fine. But the book is sui generis. There's nothing that will take away the original because it can add depth to it that a movie can't do. I've always looked at a book as 3 to 4 dimensional. Movies typically are 2-dimensional. Again, you don't really participate in the movie at all. You're not asked to figure things out. You're just supposed to sit there as a silent witness to what's unfolding. But books, interpreting words and language in a novel, that requires a lot of work on behalf of the reader. It's like this, a bond of trust between the reader and the writer that if you spend the time on what I'm writing, you will come out at the end somehow better for it. That's sort of the deal you make. But it takes work, and because it takes work, a lot of people are like, "I don't wanna do it. I don't wanna, I want my 2 minutes of pop, and then I'll move on to something else and get another pop." It's
Yeah.
kinda like, well, yeah, that's what meth does too. So, wouldn't recommend that either.
No, it is amazing that, God, flashback just 10 years. I'm not even talking about 30 or 40. 10 years. We weren't doing that super fast scroll. Now you can't even, and I said this to Tammy, my wife, the other day. I'm like, I'm frustrated. I'm mad at myself. Like it's little hits of, what's the chemical? Dopamine. It's like, yeah, little hits of dopamine. And I'm like, it frustrates me because I'm like, I don't want this.
I know, I've gotten rid of a lot of apps too. I have, like, this trigger on my phone that tells me when I've reached a certain number of hours on it, and then I just stop. And, and it bothers me sometimes how quickly I reached my limit. What we see online is ultra-processed food digitally. And ultra-processed food, it was put together chemically to give you that pop of dopamine. These guys are really smart. The same thing happened with cigarette manufacturers. They did the same thing. And so you're absolutely right. You get a pop of this because it's Pavlov, here's the treat boy, here's the treat boy. Just keep going, keep strolling. You're going to get another treat. And we fall for it. And it just kills me that I see people out there, glued to that thing for no reason other than it actually is highly addictive. They're not really learning that much from this stuff.
To this very point, we're almost 15 minutes in. Attention spans may not keep them here, so I got to make sure I hit Strangers in Time. As you'll notice, there are moments in the book that jumped out at me, and so I tend to, and it's an arc, so I feel perfectly okay with this. I would never destroy a regular book, Mr. Baldacci. And I wrote a little blurb of what I felt about this book. I said, David Baldacci ventures from his signature thrillers into historical fiction territory in an emotionally resonant experience set against 1944 London. Simply brilliant. Tooting my horn about tooting your horn, if I may. But this is a departure from how I was introduced to you back there in 96. And I wanted to ask, and as I'm reading it, and I'm going to get to these 2 points that I really want to attach to, and I know you've stepped off the legal train, so I'm not idiot enough to go, why aren't you writing just all legal thrillers, Mr. Baldacci? But what brought this particular book to you?
About 10 years ago, my wife gave me a blank page journal, probably longer than 10 years ago, for Christmas. And I was like, I tell people, don't give a writer blank paper on a major holiday. You're never going to see them again. Maybe that was her point. I don't know. She's much smarter than I am. And I started writing a book called Calamity of Souls that came out last year. And that was historical fiction set in 1968. That was a legal drama, a lot of it autobiographical, where I grew up. But about a year later, she'd give me another journal, and I went and started writing Strangers in Time. And I titled it, the first chapter, A Boy Called Charlie. And I wrote the first 150 pages of both those books by hand in those journals because I think better in cursive.
Yeah.
Sometimes the keyboard gets in the way of actually what I want to get from here onto the page. And both those books took me well over a decade because I would stop writing on them, didn't know if I was going to finish it. I was working on other books. I would go back to them, read some pages, get re-energized. But really, with Strangers in Time, I've been an Anglophile for a long time. I've been to the UK countless times. I love the people, the culture, everything about it. But what I really wanted, and I thought it was important, particularly these days.
All right, let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll hear the rest of that story as David Baldacci shares more about Strangers in Time here on the Thriller Zone. Stay with us. Dave Temple here with Gary Questenberry on the Thriller Zone. We're talking about the book Homecoming. Gary happens to be our sponsor for this week, and I want to say thank you for your support.
It's my pleasure. Any way I can support this podcast is fine with me because I really appreciate everything you're doing.
Tell me about Case
Case Younger is a former Army veteran, Army Ranger, and an air marshal. He took that air marshal job to try to slip into a more anonymous lifestyle. But that all changed one day when he found himself in the middle of a hijacking. The media frenzy that followed, he decided that he wanted to get away from that limelight and return to his little hometown in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. When he got there, there's some things that are going wrong, and Case realizes the hard way that sometimes the peace you're looking for comes at a very steep price.
I love it. And if you want to learn more, give us the website.
You can find everything you need to know on my website. That's GaryQuessenberry.com. So it's GaryQuessenberry.com.
Welcome back.
I wanted in this book to show that humanity has been faced with daunting challenges when it didn't look like we were ever going to come out the other end of the tunnel intact, but we did. And so that was the first point. The second point was that human beings are social creatures. And it's really important for us to particularly go through bad times, not alone and isolated, which can only deepen the hurt, but go through it with people we can trust and rely upon and have faith in. And I thought, how do you get an original take on, this is like the 4 millionth book written on World War II. So I decided to give you the atmosphere of the war, but I wasn't going to dwell on the war. I wanted to talk about 3 people, a boy from the East End, a girl from the West End, and a bookseller in the middle. They've all had losses. They're bereaved. They have all got sort of secrets in their past they have to deal with, which we all have crap we have to deal with. And then I was going to make them lose what little they had, and they were like, it's almost like when you go into the army, they strip you of everything that makes you a human being and they build you into the war machine they need, right? So I stripped them of everything they had and then asked them to survive. And how did they do that? Well, they came together, individually. I don't think they could have made it, but together they had a shot. And I just wanted this to be a lesson to people that 1, we faced calamity before, and 2, you don't have to go through it alone. In fact, your chances of success are much greater if you go through it with people you actually care about and can trust.
Well, if you'll allow me, and it's so funny, there's so much good, it's atmospheric, it's introspective, it's emotionally resonant. I love the character development and human resilience. That was the thing that I kept going back. But for those who are questioning, should I pick this up? Yes, let's just start there. But it started at the very beginning, and I was thinking to myself, how can I describe to my audience who are thriller fans, hardcore through and through, give them an example of what you're looking for, of what you're going to be presenting. And this paragraph at the beginning jumped out at me because it gives so much tone and character. The poor cherish their possessions because they could invariably see all of them at the same time. The rich did not miss that for which they had 4 spares. Thus, Charlie had no compunction relieving from affluent folks a bit of their surplus.
Yeah.
There's like 10 things going on in those 3 sentences that tell you class struggle sets the tone, empathy, introspection, survival.
Yeah. For me, when I was writing scripts for a while, and I've adapted one of my own books for movie, Wish You Well, I really thought about the economy of words. I thought in my earlier books, I was too verbose. I said in 100 words what I would have said with more discipline and more work in 10. So I've gotten to the point where I call it the Gettysburg Address way of writing. The Gettysburg Address is the greatest political speech in this country's history. It was only like 360 words long. Lincoln only took 2.5 minutes to speak at the Gettysburg dedication. The congressman of Pennsylvania who spoke before him spoke for 2.5 hours. Nobody remembers what the hell that guy was or what he said. But I've always thought that every word in the Gettysburg Address had earned its right to be in there. And while I'm never going to approach that level of eloquence, I try to do the same thing. So in those sentences you just read, I needed to do a whole lot of things. I needed to show people the desperation of Charlie, the circumstances facing him, the fact that the rich made out far easier than the poor during World War II in London. But also, and this was probably the most prevalent point I was trying to get across at that point in the book, was that even though he was a thief, Charlie had principles. He had morals. And that also led into his connection with Ignatius Oliver and what he did when he went back to the shop later.
Yeah.
I wanted you to follow this young man because even though life had been absolute hell for him, he'd never had any opportunities to do anything, much like the people he grew up with in Bethnal Green. But he still had morals. He still had love in his heart. And he was still a kid who wanted to do the right thing at the same time, trying to survive. And I felt, the words in those 3 sentences did everything I wanted them to do. But it was important to get that out early because I wanted people to have that touchstone to follow as you were going through the rest of the novel.
Well, I found it so interesting, David, and I'm so glad you said that because of all the words in this, and I'm guessing 110, 120, that jumped out at me, and then this one. And if this is too much of a giveaway, you can tell me and I'll cut it out. But this, if you want to say, hey, what is it about? It's close to the end. Together, they had confronted a collective hardship that at times seemed beyond anyone's capacity. It spoke well indeed of the resilience of the human spirit when one had friends with whom to share the sometimes calamitous burden of existence.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah. I mean, if people go back and look at their lives, that will describe pretty faithfully what a lot of us have to go through. Some people suffer a lot more than others, but everyone suffers. I don't care how much wealth you have or don't have, where you came from. Everybody suffers through, points like that in their lives. But I think it's really important, particularly in a day and age now with technology, where more and more people feel isolated. I see all these reports of young men who have no friends.
Yeah.
And they feel isolated, and that's not a good thing because bad things come out of isolation because all of a sudden people start going down weird rabbit holes that they never come out of again. So for me, I think it's really important. Again, we're social creatures and we are built to deal with each other. We are built to sort of come together, find commonality, and to make it through hard times. Family, it's easy to be a friend during good times. The full measure of friendship, I think, is born out through bad times. And I so wanted that point to resonate from this story because that's really the reason I had these 3 characters. And I put it through the steps that I did during the novel with the outcome that was had at the end of the novel too. I wanted it to be, even though it's about war and terrible things and people were dying all over the place, at the end of the novel, I hope the emotion people take away from it is hope,
Yeah.
because that's what I intended.
Well, and this is, I hope I'm kind of close in this, especially the way you described that. If it made me feel a similar way that when I'm watching Saving Private Ryan. Yes, the war is happening all around you in a way that a director had never quite done before. And you're completely surrounded and overwhelmed by all of that. Yet the story is really about finding one person and sending him home, and the struggle of all the men who come together, realizing that it's going to be the bond of friendship that will make the bond of survival.
I'm glad you brought up Private Ryan. I've often thought about that movie. I love the movie for lots of different reasons. And I would change one word in the title, but I think it means the same because in the midst of a war where men are killing other men in enormous numbers and doing things to them that in peacetime they wouldn't even contemplate. What that story was really about, it was not saving Private Ryan. It was saving humanity. That's what it was. So in the middle of a war where your job is to kill other people as fast and as quickly and as many as you possibly can, if you come out of that war without your humanity, it's not going to be a good place for you. It's certainly not going to be a good place for the people around you. So really I think they were saving that movie was humanity. Because right in the middle of this terrible conflict, you had people trying to do the right thing person to person. And that was really the whole point of it.
And nobody carried the core of that exact idea better than Tom Hanks in the way that he approached, viewed, absorbed, moved through life.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, and I loved it too. He was an everyman. He even had, I think his name was Miller, Sergeant Miller. You can't come up with that. It's like the most common name in America. There's like 5 million Millers in America.
Yeah.
Guy from the Midwest, just a lunch pail kind of guy. He did his job as a soldier, but he did his job as a human being even more in that movie.
Yeah. Well, this book does that in spades. I mean, there are moments where you want to hug Charlie, you want to be his best friend, you want to teach him things. Again, I'm going to go back to this phrase about emotional resilience and human resilience, facing adversity. It was just I was reading it and I was thinking about my mom and dad who grew up, they were born in 31, so they were going through some of the tail end of a lot of this, and their perspective of life helped me appreciate life in a different way, because the way they would hoard things and save things, I would often go, why? That's worthless. But when you didn't have anything, or you had it taken away constantly because of the stress and strife.
Yeah,
Anyway,
everything was precious that you
yeah.
had possession of. I read a lot of letters, much like the WPA did in this country during the Depression. Um, Over in England, I had a scene where they had artists who were painting some of the devastation. That was a real thing. But they also, there was this cache of letters that people wrote describing their experiences during the Blitz and the other years of the war. And some of them were just amazing. You would have one guy who wrote, "Yeah, my house was bombed this morning and totally destroyed." And he goes, "But I was only a half an hour late to work, so that was a good thing." And I'm like, that tells me all I need to know about, the spirit of the people back then. I know that, keep calm and carry on. It's a cliche, but at the end of the day, people found the wherewithal to get through the day when most people would, if they had suffered what those people had suffered, they would be on the floor in a fetal position, unable to do anything, for the rest of their lives. But, so the house was bombed, but he was only a half an hour late to work. I held that line in my mind as I was writing the novel, and it was sort of like a touchstone for me, which is important when you're diving into so many emotional fragments in a novel like this. So it gave me a lot of clarity.
David, I took your master class back and that, if anyone has never done that, it's worth the price of admission. I learned more in one sitting with you than I could learn in reading 10 books, because you have such an eloquent way of, like you've done in this interview in 29 minutes, getting to the heart of the matter, being very succinct, not verbose. And I think, did you not say in one of your sessions, and this was quite a bit of time ago, so bear with me, do you not put a phrase or on a piece of paper and hold it just like you just said, that kind of is the general theme of the story, so that as you're writing, you always want to make sure you're true to that theme?
Yeah, it's important, I think, because if you don't have something like that, you can go sideways quickly and build a lot of things in the story that are unnecessary and actually detract from the overall effect you're going for. When I was a lawyer, and my daughter's graduating law school in about a month, and she's already been in court on some cases as a student attorney. They allow them to do that in Maryland for some people who otherwise couldn't afford lawyers. And she asked me, "I'm going into court today. What's some advice?" And I said, "Keep it simple. Keep it absolutely simple. I don't care if you're speaking before a judge or a jury, and you don't give them 10 things to hang their hat on, 8 things, 4 things, 3 things. You give them one thing to hang their hat on, and you hammer away at that as eloquently as you can, but always come back to that point." And that's really all human beings need to move forward in a positive way. So in the novel, it's 400 pages long or more, having a clarifying thread that you can then extrapolate out and build on. You start with this, and at the end of the novel, you have a mountain. Hopefully the mountain does everything you want it to do. If you start out with a lot of different things, you never rise high. You just rise wide. And at the end of the day, there's really nothing that resonates at the end, because people are like, "I have no idea what the hell he even meant with that." There's like 87 things I'm supposed to think about. All I want is I have one theme, and I build on that theme in 100 different ways. But at the end, it's up here, and that theme still resonates.
And isn't that kind of the key to creating a character's arc, especially when you're talking about the protagonist? So if you're looking at Charlie, what does Charlie want? What's the one thing he wants? And that want really very seldom changes. He wants a pair of shoes and some food in his belly.
Yeah.
And while that may sound oversimplistic, it's all the lessons, and the way you layer those lessons in until the very end is so beautiful. And it was such a refreshing, and I'm a hardcore thriller writer, but it was such a refreshing turn to step into the shoes of people that I had never considered in a time that I wasn't around and didn't fully understand. So it gave me a great appreciation.
I'm glad. That's really that's the effect that I wanted. And again, when I grew up in the tail end of Jim Crow in Richmond, Virginia, the old Capitol Confederacy with all those Confederate monuments and everything. I grew up in a world of total racism, surrounded by racists, and I could have grown up like that. I knew a lot of people who did, friends and family. But my parents took my brother and sister out of the library every week, and I traveled the world without a plane ticket or a passport. And the one thing that any type of prejudice, discrimination, or racism has, I always like to call it the boogeyman hook. So fear those people. They don't look like you, and they think differently, and they want to harm you. And if you haven't read about them in books, you'll be like, Jesus, yeah, you're right. I'm going to be like that. But my response to that was, nope, I spent time with them on the page. I know exactly who they are. They're just like me. They want the same things that I want. So the boogeyman argument is not going to work with me. I've always felt like books were body armor against bigotry. They just really are, because when you spend time with people on a page, it's an intimate experience. And then it's very hard for someone else to come forward with spacious arguments to try to convince you that those people are not good people.
Yeah.
So that's why books are so important in people's lives.
Yet another similarity that we share, besides the name David, is that you grew up in Richmond. I grew up in Lynchburg.
Yep.
We're within months of the same age, so we had that same growing up experience, and I remember those days. I mean, Lynchburg. Hi, where do you think Lynch came from? Anyway,
Yeah.
There's two things. I always close with one question that I want to make sure I hit, but there's two things I want to scoot in real quick. What was it about your mother growing up that played such a pivotal role in encouraging your storytelling?
So when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I used to argue with everybody about everything, and they started calling me the Austin Avenue, the street I grew up on, lawyer. Years later, I actually became a lawyer. But I also was the kid who, never stopped talking, yarn, stories. It was my job in our neighborhood to come up with all of our adventures, our journeys, the battles we would fight. I would give out lines to people so they would know what to say, and I love that. So one day when I was maybe 8 or 9, my mom came to me and said, honey, here's a journal. I know you love to read. I know you like these stories you're talking about all the time. Why don't you try writing some of them down? I think it'll be fun for you. So I did, and it was like this epiphany. I was like, my God, pen hit the paper. I never looked back. And from that day forward, I've been writing consistently for, almost 60 years now.
Wow.
And years later, I went back to my mom and I said, Mom, thank you so much. What a gift you gave me that day. It changed the whole direction of my life. And she said, honey, I'm so glad it's worked out for you. But quite frankly, I just wanted to shut you the hell up. you know? So even moms need a little peace and quiet. And then she dropped this Southern phrase on me. I still remember it. She goes, you had gotten on my last nerve, boy.
Oh,
So, yeah, I credit my mom with that. So there you go.
and if they set the the preface to that statement as "bless your heart, but you are getting on my last nerve," then you got a double whammy, folks.
Double whammy. I think my mom was letting me down easy.
Yeah, bless your heart. All right, and the other thing is, and I love this about you, and I think you've done this for a long time. Beyond writing, you've always expressed a strong commitment to philanthropy, and your Wish You Well Foundation has done remarkable things. Can you tell me, and it's supporting literacy programs, can you give our audience just a little taste of what that is and how you've been able to impact people's lives with that?
Yeah, so we really we accept grant applications from organizations all across the U.S., all 50 states, and our statement is very simple: it's eradicate illiteracy in the U.S., which is a huge problem. It's not an ESL problem. It goes across all stratas: American-born, ESL, urban, suburban, rural. And we fund as many programs across the country that fit our mission statement as possible. And our goal, again, is to make people read at the highest levels they can, because that will dictate how well they're going to do socially and also economically. If you can't read at a high level, you're never going to achieve your potential as a human being. Even more than that, your kids are going to grow up functionally challenged at a literacy level, because if your parents are illiterate, chances are you're going to be literacy challenged, and you're going to plateau out far below where you could have achieved otherwise. Plus, at the end of the day, we count on citizens to be well-read, well-informed, process information, and make good decisions at the voting booth. And that is sole requirement of a sustainable democracy, that people are, informed. The last election, I think you know, 50% of young men under the age of 25 watched Joe Rogan and in the last 2 days and then made their decision. I'm not saying they voted for the wrong person. But I'm saying that the process should be a little bit different than that. And listening to one person is probably not the best thing to do. Read a lot, cover the issues, be consistent, know what's going on year after year, month after month, and then you can make better decisions. But if you can't read, then you can't do that. And I've always equated the verb to read with the verb to think. It's impossible to do one without the other.
Yeah. Well, you saw the grin on my face because you knew was thinking we could go down that rabbit hole, but I don't know that it would do a whole lot of good right now. Plus, we don't have enough time because you and I would probably go off on tangents until the cows came home. So I will, right? Am I right?
You're right. Tangents are
Yeah.
fun. They do take time.
Yeah. So let's do this. I want to close being respectful of your time. Best writing advice for aspiring writers. And I'm going to interject this real quick. I remember going back to a master's class and I'm like, when you gave the writing advice, which I will not say, I was like, well, of course. And I'm going to be curious if it holds true when you share it now, because there are a lot of aspiring writers in my audience, and this is their favorite part of the show. What's David Baldacci going to say is the best writing advice? So hit me with your best shot.
Yeah, the old adage is, and I think is what I said in the master class, I certainly believe it. The old adage is write what you know. I would modify that, and I would say write what you'd like to know about. Because you need passion in your tank. You need a full tank of passion to write anything. And if you're following a trend, you think something is hot, well, you're going to find out you're 3 trends behind by the time you actually finish it. So that's worthless to you. I always give out the example of Laura Hillenbrand, who wrote Seabiscuit, about this amazing horse in the 1930s. She was suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome during the time she wrote the novel, knew nothing about horses, but fascinated by this horse. So over the course of a decade, she learned everything there was to know about horse racing in the 30s, everything to know about Seabiscuit, because she had a passion about it, because she didn't know about it, but she wanted to know about it. And ended up writing one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. So what I mean is, yes, you could write about things you know about, but there's an excitement of, there's this mystery out there. I'm so interested in this. I want to learn about it. And once you get into the research of it and immerse yourself in that world, all of a sudden your characters pop, your prose gets better, your plots get better, and things seem to hum along a little bit better just because you're interested in what you're trying to do. You're not chasing a trend. You're not writing a code book because Dan Brown wrote one. You're not writing a Jurassic Park because Michael Crichton did it. You're writing about something because you, the writer, are interested in it. And that is going to come through in the pages. And interest and passion always make stories better. You got to have it.
So nicely put. And yeah, that's exactly what you said in masterclass. Do you feel like, with 150 million copies of your books worldwide, and like I said, almost 60 books or more, and with no signs of slowing down, I'm sure we're going to be seeing another one come out at the end of this year. I would love to get your input on this, because this is something I don't think I've heard anywhere that you speak about. How do you see the world of publishing different today than you did when you started? Because we started the conversation about 96. You were a perfect storm, right place, right time, great writer, business savvy. But the world has changed. The publishing world has changed so much in that time. How do you feel it is today? And if you have an idea where it's going, what is that?
I think that, we have a lot of wonderful writers coming up who are getting attention they might otherwise not have. But at the same side, it's really hard to break out as a new writer now. I came along at a really good time. Now there are just so many competing factors. And at the same time, a lot of what's happened in publishing, a lot of writers started out with mass market, and they were able to build an audience doing that. Mass market is dead. ReaderLink now said they're not even going to do mass markets. And I fear for the business of publishing, because it seemed like, we had these multiple silos, and we added a few along the way. We had hardcover and trade paper and mass market and audio. And then we added ebooks, and that was like, great, now we have more silos. Now the silos are disappearing one by one by one. Mass market is gone. Ebooks have plateaued. Now we don't have CDs anymore, but you have audios that you can listen to this, and that's great. This is now growing. Okay, that's wonderful. But 2 years from now, will this be the only thing that we have? Our hardcover is going to be gone. Our trade's going to be gone. We're just going to be able to listen to books. So that's challenging for publishers. I'm not really sure how we work our way out of that, but I do think that we can, as a citizenry, just try to inform young people, old people, and everyone between the power of actually opening a book and reading it, which I think is slipping through the people's grasp right now. It's not a priority for anyone anymore. We have a dedicated group of people who read consistently, but it keeps shrinking as people keep dying off. I don't want to see that happen. I want people to be excited about books and open them up however they do. They listen to them. They can read them on an ebook. They can read them on a hardcover. It doesn't really matter so long as they keep reading. Publishing and just the world in general needs to tell people that reading is fundamental, not just, for your intelligence, but it's fundamental for humanity. It's really the only way we can reach. There's no way we can personally go through our life and experience the entire spectrum of human existence. We have to fill the rest of it in through reading about people who've done things we have not done in our lives. And that's what fills out the rest of our humanity. And if we don't do that, then I don't know where we go. So I feel good about some parts of the publishing world and new writers coming up. In the business of writing, I feel very nervous right now because silos keep disappearing.
I think it's so interesting that, when ebooks came on the market, everybody made this mad rush to it. Now, I'm old school, dude. Send me, people, publicists would say, let me send you a PDF. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I want to hold the paper. I'm that old school. Maybe old is the main word, and school is a byproduct. But first of all, I want to take notes. I want to feel it. I want to go back to it. I want to experience. It's my way of experiencing it more wholeheartedly. So I am with you. I fear that as we said early on, between the shrinking attention spans and the pure volume of competition, and the fact that the big 5 became 4, became 3, became who knows what it is today, that we're in for a world of hurt.
Yeah. My son was telling me YouTube is probably the best deal Google ever made. They bought YouTube for $6 billion a number of years ago. It's probably worth over $1 trillion now, but it is the go-to place now. They're I don't know. He said there are 1 billion downloads to YouTube every day. I can only imagine the server farm, the electricity that costs, but people are spending a lot of time. If they spend half the time that they spend watching YouTube videos, reading books, I guarantee they'd be far better.
Yeah. Well, folks, the book is Strangers in Time. You want to learn more, go to davidbaldacci.com. And I will admit, I tried to keep my geek factor at bay, David, but this has been a genuine honor. I'm so grateful for your time.
I enjoyed it very much, David. Thank you. It's always great to talk about these issues. Anytime.
Well, I would be remiss if I did not ask. I mean, it's only April. What's going to happen for DB coming down the pike in the next 6 months or so?
So I got a new book coming out in November, brand new character. I thought I could put it all into one book, but it's going to be a 2-book series with a guy named Walter Nash. So the first book comes out in November, and the second book comes out, which I just finished, is going to be coming out in April. I wanted it really back to back so people couldn't lose the continuity of the story. And it's one that really resonates with me. I've never written this kind of character before, but it really, writing these 2 books it didn't feel like work to me. It just felt like the point where I needed to be in my life at that moment in time. And I'm really excited about it. And I've got another Aloysius Archer book that I'm finishing up, my Gumshoe Detective it's now 1958. In fact, I wrote these 2 books simultaneously. I would spend 2 weeks in contemporary times and 2 weeks in 1958. And I would go back and forth. And it was almost cathartic in some ways because, you get too hot and heavy on one and you move over to the other and it's like this deep breath. So
yeah,
I just keep plugging away, I tell people, some of them, like you said, some of my writer friends call up and say, shit, I've got another deadline. I'm hating life. I said, whoa, take a breath, step back, shut up and listen to this. We are paid a lot of money to make stuff up. So basically, we are paid a lot of money to remain 8 years old our entire life. So don't talk to me about deadlines or anything else. Just go out and keep having fun.
I love that. Well, I hope you'll consider coming back to the show.
Yes, absolutely. I loved it. I loved our conversation. This is my sweet spot. This is my wheelhouse. This is where I like to be. When I'm talking about books, shows like yours are where I want to be.
Well, the only way this can get any better, and I say this, my listeners are going to go, geez, Dave, let that go. But it's face to face. So if there's ever any way I can sit across a table from you with camera and microphones, I'm going to make that happen. If I got to come roll up on your doorstep and go, come on, DB, let's Let's get going.
I look forward to that. Absolutely.
Wow. What a highlight of this podcast. It just goes to show, folks, set your intentions, aim for the stars, and hope that it happens, plan like it'll happen, and dreams do come true. Boy, I feel like Mr. Pollyanna. Every once in a while, no, I'm not going to say every once in a while, pretty much my entire life, I have set intentions. I'm big on setting intentions. And about a year ago, I set my intention to get David Baldacci on the show. One thing this podcast has taught me, got to have a little bit of patience and tenacity. And here we are about a year later, and I'm sitting down with only one of the biggest writers of all time, number one bestselling author, David Baldacci. And wait till you see what he has written. If you're brand new to finding out about Dave, he started off with legal thrillers, and this historical fiction is going to have you scratching your head going, how does he do it? But you're going to cozy up with a tea in a quiet room, and you're just going to enjoy it. Now, before we scoot out of here, let me tell you about something that's happening tomorrow, a bonus episode, and I think you're going to be impressed. You want a quick, fast little read that feels kind of like Jack Reacher? Gary Quessenberry is going to be on the show, and let me tell you something. This guy, down to earth, good dude. He's actually going to sponsor the first week of May, so we appreciate that. If you would like to be on the show, you can do that. Just write us at thethrillerzone@gmail.com. Once again, that is thethrillerzone@gmail.com. Drop us a note, tell us about your book, and we'll see what we can do for you. All right, until next time, I'm your host, Dave Temple. Thanks so much for being there. It's so much fun. I'll see you next time for another edition of The Thriller Zone. The Thriller Zone with Dave Temple has been sponsored by Gary Quessenberry and his new Case Young thriller, Homecoming. Learn more at GaryQuessenberry.com.